there's this giant map, and there's no vehicles. And I would never, ever, ever want to make a game like this, ever. Hey, what's up all of you beautiful subscribers? I'm Jack Chappell, the developer for the upcoming game Attika Origins, and we are going to be reacting to some more bad and great video games, two of which were requested by you guys in the comments of previous videos. So anyways, let's just jump into the first, well, user requested video game, the Man For Madden. So right off the bat here, most of these character models look really good. I mean, the textures, you can see like the pores on their skin, the tiny little hairs on this guy's mustache here. I mean, the character models in this game are really fantastic in my opinion. However, there's something off about the way their mouths move, and I think it's really clear when I show you that character. Oh, that's right, Fliss is her name. So she, in some of her scenes, not all, I would say just in a fraction of her scenes, for whatever reason, her mouth just doesn't appear to be realistic at all. In most scenes, it's pretty good, but in some scenes like this, it just seems like her mouth is just moving up and down, and that's not realistic. I mean, when you talk, your mouth moves in, it moves out, it moves, you know, the middle part might move down a little bit more when you say something like M, like that, it curves down a little bit. You know, sometimes when you say something, a little bit perks up on at the end here, there's a little bit of a curve. And so in some of her scenes, like in a small fraction, I just kind of noticed that the mouth is a little bit off, but for the most part, it's pretty good. This is the one scene in my opinion where it stood out, where it just looked like her mouth just wasn't really moving properly. And you see this for a lot of the other characters too, just sometimes. Most of this is fantastic. Most of the graphics and the actual animations in this game is like a 9 out of 10. It's really, really good. But just for whatever reason, the mouths in this game, as a game developer, there's just something a little bit off here. And wow, the lighting and the shadows and everything in this game, just the whole environment of this game is really, really well done. There isn't really any... This is one of the best lighting setups I've seen in a game, just period. So this is really well done here. I just wanted to go back here a few seconds. Just one of the little things I noticed here is the, like, I guess the mud here on the ship, or you can see the lighting and the moisture like really reflect really well off the ground here where their characters are walking. I mean, that's really, really top notch there. It's just one of those little details that you see as a game developer. It's just like, wow, they put in a lot of work into the detail of just some little things in this game. So, but the lighting, this is just fantastic. However, one of the problems that comes with, I guess, kind of making a scene look like this and look the shadows look that good is that nearly every person online that's played this game, that's recorded it, has seen a massive drop in frame rate because, you know, a lot of people don't realize this, but arguably the most expensive computational thing when making a game and playing a game is actually the shadows in the game. So what happens is when you have one light source, like the sun, you know, I have 1.5 in my game, I guess. So in Attika, what happens is you have the sun, and that casts a light on everything that you see on screen. So what happens is the computer has to calculate, okay, so this sun has to go through all of these blades of grass and all of these trees, and every single little detail of that shadow has to be calculated in real time. And that takes up a lot of computational data. And so when you have a game like this, which might have 4 dim lights in a scene, 5 dim lights, or sometimes just 1 or 2, and you have very detailed shadows where you want it down to very, very, very small points of light, I guess that's probably one of the largest reasons why this game drops in frame rate so much, is because the expensive cost of the shadows and the textures to just display this high quality scene to the player, I guess. So going back to the frame rate dropping for most of the people playing this game, it's almost always in larger open sets. You know, there's one on the top of the ship, and then there's one like this where there's, you know, there's one lamp there, there's another lamp, and then there's kind of a skylight. So there's 3 different light sources here, each giving pretty detailed shadows. And so your computer has to calculate shadows for very detailed shadows for 3 different sources of light. That's very expensive here. And in open scenes like this, where there's a lot of, I guess, just a lot of stuff in the scene, it just takes up a lot of space, and that's what makes the frame rate drop. So there you go. I feel like a lot of the hallways in this game are pretty much just copy and pasted from the other ones. I mean, you spend a giant chunk of the game walking through these hallways, and they all kind of look very, very similar in my opinion. I feel like the developer might have just copy and pasted a lot of the details, or at least the setup, and just kind of changed a few things, maybe changed some of the steel bars on the wall or something. But I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the hallways were just copy and pasted. And of course, I need to talk about the main, or I guess only real gameplay mechanic, is the, decisions and the quick time events, because as a developer, I can feel the pain from the developers that actually had to make this game and to make all of those different storylines and cutscenes. So in a typical game with like a 4-hour story or so, there might be like 100 very quick cutscenes, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more depending on the game. This one, if you were to just play this from the very beginning to the very end, and it's just 4 hours, we're talking, 500 cutscenes, if not more, something around that. I haven't done the math or calculated it all. But it is a ton of cutscenes, and when you allow the player to pretty much change every single cutscene depending on the choices that they make, well, we're talking the developers had to make thousands, maybe tens of thousands of different cutscenes for this game, which is absolutely insane, and I would never, ever, ever want to make a game like this, ever. And not because I'm saying that this isn't a good game. I mean, this is a pretty good game, especially if you like these kinds of story modes, and then it's a really good game. But I'm just saying the headaches that it would cause to actually make a game like this, I would never, ever want to make it. Actually, one of the things that I've noticed about this game is that for a lot of the scenes, seeing different people play through it, I think that they just copy and pasted the character models into certain scenes, so that might have saved developers some times. So I think that the Man For Medan and the previous game Until Dawn are pretty good examples of when you have a good enough story and cinematics, the lack of, I don't want to say lack of gameplay, the lack of depth of gameplay, because the entire gameplay of these games are just, pretty much pressing buttons, and occasionally you get to move around and, click and interact with objects. But apart from that, there isn't much of gameplay mechanics. But yeah, just having a good enough story and cinematics and making the player feel like their choices actually matter, that can overcome a lot of different things, because this is a pretty good game. And what did you guys think of the Man For Medan? Let me know in the comments down below. So next up on the list of games to react to is the Culling 2. Oh boy, look at this. Okay, here's something I want to show you about LODs, which I've been talking about in previous videos, for levels of detail. So each one of these trees here has a different level of detail depending on how close you are to them. Now, right now, we're pretty far away from these trees, so you can actually see that these trees are in a 2D shape right now. These trees are just pretty much paper. Look at this. The trees are just one paper thing standing up, and as you get closer here, you can see them snapping into existence. You can start seeing the 3D popping up here. But look at that. You can actually see the trees popping in and out here. So that's not a good start, actually. So just looking at this game here, one of the things that is really bothering me is that nothing in this game is dynamic. I mean, looking at this grass here, let's just take a pause here. The grass, the trees, everything here, okay? Just take a look. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but almost every 3D game that is decent has some sort of dynamicism to each of the pieces of foliage, or at least to the main ones like grass. So for example, at a lot of other games, the grass will slightly change color. There'll be some sort of dynamic lighting, so the shadows will change a little bit. Maybe the grass will flow back and forth. Maybe in some games, when you walk through the grass will actually move. But in here, the grass is just like paper. And it's not moving, nothing's changing color, there's no movement to any of the scenery in this game, and it's just very strange. And one thing that really bothered a lot of the players of this game is that when you're aiming a gun in like a typical game, that's not the Culling 2, when you aim it, the bullet will relatively go to where you want it to go. Occasionally if you go to a World War II game, the gun will rattle around and it'll miss. There's some sort of randomness about it. But for a lot of games like Halo and one of the future games we're going to be talking about, where you aim, that's where the bullet goes. In this game, the randomness they put in is so much that you don't really shoot wherever you want to shoot, and you can't even see the bullets. There's just nothing that whatever you shoot, you just have to kind of rapid fire. Even when you're aiming down the sight, the bullet just doesn't go where you want it to go, which is very frustrating, especially for a lot of the skilled players who would want to play this game for a long time. It just seems that no matter how hard you practice or how much you aim the gun, the bullet just never seems to go anywhere close to the target. So, some randomness in these shooting games does help with some parity for some of the lesser players too. So it protects them for the more expert shooters who, are almost always deadlocked. And it allows them, if they don't have any perfect aim on a character, maybe it can slightly get nudged towards, hitting the actual person they're trying to hit. So some randomness is okay in some games. But where it's just nowhere close to where you're shooting, like in this, that's just not good. So I looked up a little bit more about this game, and this map, because I realized this map is giant. It's suitable for like probably 150, maybe 120 players, 100 players. That's probably, what would be suitable for this game. But the trouble is that when this game was active on Steam, it peaked at like 13 players, just total playing this game at once. It was supposed to be a big launch. It's supposed to, draw in thousands of players playing at the same time. But like really no one's playing. And then it got taken off the shelves of Steam, actually. I didn't know this. Even when I started recording this video, this game is no longer available on Steam because players just disliked it that much. And so near the end of, the Culling 2's release, people, to start a game, you needed 30 players, but there was only like 5 people online. So the people who wanted to play would go on and they just couldn't start a game, which was just, that should be the biggest no-no. People should be able to play a game if they bought it whenever they want to. I mean, especially for online games too, like you should maximum be waiting a couple minutes to play a big game like this, maximum, especially with other games out there like Fortnite or PUBG that already have this battle royale formula taken over where they don't even have to wait for games. You're just immediately right into a game within, essentially seconds. If people have to wait hours to play a game like this, there's no way you're going to be successful. So at least, you got to have the devs that made this game playing or something, just so that people can jump into games at any point at any time they want to. So, in a game like this with a giant map, one of the biggest problems is that there's no vehicles. This giant map suitable for hundreds of players has no vehicles. So you can only really walk around, it takes forever to go from one place to another. At least PUBG, you got vehicles and you can move around here. But in the Culling 2, I mean, look at how fast this player moves. This might take an hour to go from one end of the map to the other, maybe more. That's just unacceptable for a battle royale game like this. And not because players are going to go from one point of the map to the other side. It's mainly because there's nothing else to do. If the players never meet up, there's no action in this game. The players are too spread out. So in my opinion here, if this map was a lot smaller, maybe you could start a game with 5 players or even less, like an old school Halo game where you could have, essentially 4, 8 to play and make this map, 1/10 the size, 1/20th, 1/30th the size. Maybe this game could have survived, but it just couldn't with maps this big and needing, 30 players to play a game. It's just unacceptable. Well, apparently the developers for the Culling 2 put out, I'm guessing this is an apology video?
I'm Josh Van Velde. I'm the Director of Operations here at Xavier. We weren't happy with our relationship with the community. We weren't happy with how you felt about the game. We weren't happy with the game ourselves, but we didn't see a path forward. So,
you know what? Props to them for actually putting out, I guess, an apology video for, seeing the mistakes that they had in their game. You don't really see that too often. I mean, respect to these guys. And, this also brings up the whole, what is early access for? So, like, what is beta for? What is alpha for? What is early access on Steam for? Nowadays, when you see an early access game, a lot of those games never get finished. I might actually be talking about some of those in the future, but a lot of early access games, they sell you a game for $20, say it's early access, and the game never becomes good. And so this whole early access thing, I might do a full video on that. I mean, who knows? I might do an early access or maybe just a demo or something eventually, but I want to finish my game. And when it's actually in early access, it doesn't mean that the game is far from finished. Early access should be, this game is like 95% done and just needs some touch-ups and some player feedback over the next few months. Early access should not be, hey, this game will come out in 3 years. This game, the game shouldn't be 20, 50% done when it's early access. It should at least have the core mechanics, all the core functionality should be in the game. Everything should be at least somewhat polished, just with some minor fixes near the end or some, just some things that require some tweaks. You shouldn't need to do an entire overhaul, which is what you see with a lot of early access games these days. And so this is just all of you out there, just be wary. There are some early access games like, actually, I don't know if this is early access. I'm going to do a whole video on this, but No Man's Sky is an example of a game where there's a lot of promise early, didn't live up to the hype, and then eventually players stuck with it, the developers were given enough time, and now that game is apparently fantastic. I'll do a whole video on that in the future. But yeah, just early access as its whole thing, I kind of have a problem with. And it's both positive too, because for an indie studio or an indie developer like myself, indie studio with just 5 or 10 people, you need that kind of bump in income sometimes to help finish the game. That's what early access is for a lot of the times, and testing bugs. But the game shouldn't be anywhere close to being done and being put on early access. In my opinion, that's just not good. It's just unfortunate that I guess this studio felt like they were pressured into putting the game out at a certain period in time, and they didn't like the game. I mean, you know, it just kind of sucks. But props to them for apologizing and giving everyone a refund is what he said. So just respect. So next up is one of the top user requested games to react to, which is Borderlands 3.
Okay, we're going to surrender. Please don't kill us, Griffey.
So the first thing I want to talk about with Borderlands 3 is actually something that a lot of game devs don't really talk about too much when building a game, is actually the dialogue of a game. And I like the dialogue of Borderlands 3. It's just kind of lighthearted humor. It's silly. I like it a lot. And the dialogue in games, especially for big AAA games like this, where there's a lot of devs on it, it's a big release, a lot of depth to the game, which we're going to get to. The dialogue a lot of the times can be make or break. Now, sometimes it can be horrible and still be fine. Like, I mean, look at Oblivion. If you look at some of the examples of Oblivion, it's kind of hilarious, some of their dialogue.
Have you heard about that pirate captain? The one who was murdered in his ship?
No.
Have you heard any word about the other provinces?
Nothing I'd like to talk about. Good day.
All right, so as I said before, like, Oblivion is a good example of, you know, the dialogue system not being the greatest, but having a game that's just was so innovative and awesome at the time that everyone just, you know, the dialogue was just a quirk, but everything else in the game was so good that this was one of the best games ever created at the time. But now getting back to Borderlands here, this is the exact opposite example where I think the dialogue kind of adds to the game, in my opinion. I know that some people don't like the dialogue and the silliness of it. I like it a lot. And so this is just shows you that, you know, having good writers and having, you know, usually you have your dev team, which actually works on the gameplay and the mechanics and building all the content. Then you have a separate kind of more creative team where it's more along the lines of, you know, the writing and the story and, you know, the feel of the game. And so whoever was writing the dialogue for this must have had a lot of fun too, and it's just props to them. Now, when you think about Borderlands, though, you really think about one thing, and that is the art style. And that art style is created by two main things. So one of which is just the actual content that is created. So whoever the artists are for this game, they build all of the textures so that it looks kind of cartoony. And the second thing that happens here is from the dev perspective, is that once you import these cartoony rocks into the game, the devs put up a post-processing of some sort, where every cartoony object in the game is actually outlined in black, and all of the textures, certain parts of the texture are outlined in black too, and that gives it that more cartoony art style. And so that's what makes it look more like this kind of more of a final production here, where everything is kind of outlined, looks a little bit more cartoony. So it's two things. Yeah. So one, the dev goes in there, they model it, and the textures look very cartoony, and that's, you know, a whole different thing. That's a whole video on its own. And then the second thing is you put in essentially what the developers do is they program a way to make those textures and that art style pop and outline. So it's a combination of two things. It's not one or the other. It's not the devs doing everything, and it's not the artists. It's a combination of the two, which makes everything look like Borderlands. You know, it's kind of funny. Borderlands 2 has some things which make it the complete opposite of the last game we talked about, which was the Culling 2. Like the Borderlands has a ton of content and interactables in each level, in each space that you are in. So there's always tons of stuff to do. You know, there's bad guys here, there's pickups here. You can destroy this piece of the environment. You can blow this up. You know, there's tons of things to do at all times. Meanwhile, in the Culling 2, there's really nothing to do. And I think that it's really important as a level designer to always ensure that, you know, is that the player always enjoys what they are doing. In the Culling, you have to kill people, but there's no one else around. In a game like Borderlands, you know, there's just tons of stuff. You have to pick up this, you have to hide behind this, you have to kill this person, you have to go to this objective, you have to pick up this, and there's just always something to do. And you know what, though? You know, I'm ripping on the Culling a little bit here, but, you know, in certain open world games that are really fantastic, you know, there's giant spaces where you really don't do anything. Like Red Dead Redemption is one. You have to do those 5-minute horse rides, which not a lot of people liked. You know, you have to look at a game like, you know, Breath of the Wild. Any really open world game, you know, it's not the same as Borderlands. There's not as much to do in each level, but again, it's all about the feel too. So in a game like the Culling, I know this is supposed to be the Borderlands aspect here, but a game like the Culling, your really only objective is to kill someone else, and there's really nothing else to do. At least in the open world games, there's side quests. You can pick up certain things. You can find other cool things in the world. In the Culling, there's not really much you can do. In Borderlands, again, this is a really good example of level design. Everything here is placed just so perfectly. Like the cover, the AI is in the perfect spots here behind cover. There's certain houses that, and just kind of, those doors that you can open. There's a lot of interactables here, and the Borderlands level design is top notch here. So, another thing about this Borderlands game is the depth of all the content in this game. I mean, there's like over 100 weapons, if not more. You can customize everything. There's tons of skills, planets you can go to. There's just tons and tons of things you can do. And so the one thing that you cannot say about Borderlands is the lack of depth with this game. There are certain things that you can rip on. There are certain glitches that people have found on launch. Some of the frame rate issues, some of the user interface issues were pretty big too, where, you will actually go to your user interface. There's one example of you click on an upgrade. You want to upgrade one of your skill points, and for whatever reason, it'll just freeze. It'll freeze for 5 to 10 seconds and you just can't do anything. And so issues like that, again, in the grand scheme of a game with all this depth and an objectively pretty decent game, those things are smaller issues, but they should be resolved if you want someone to pay a full price. Like this is a $80 Canadian game, $70 Canadian game. US, it's $50 or $60, something around those lines. So if you want someone to play AAA prices, you should have most of those issues resolved, in my opinion. But for the most part, Borderlands is a game where, I gave it a go. It's not, my favorite game or anything like that, but it's objectively a good game, and there's not really much to rip on from a developer's perspective. I mean, I can't rip on the art style because that's kind of one of the things that gives it the unique feel that people like. I can't rip on the dialogue. The weapons perform really well. There's tons of customizations. Maybe the only thing I could rip on is that there's only really a weapon system. There's no other, I guess, melee system, right? As far as I know, there's no other, magic, sorcery. There's no, apart from, some grenades and stuff you can throw. There are some abilities that you can use too. Actually, you know what? I take everything back. There are abilities and you can throw some things. So I can't even rip on that. For the most part, Borderlands is a pretty decent game. And you know what? I'm going to wrap it up by saying this. When I've talked about other games, which, you guys just don't like, even though it's the truth, is that games like Fortnite are not that difficult to make in terms of actually programming it. They take some time, but they're quite easy to make. A game like Borderlands would be almost impossible for me to consider making from scratch. There's just so much depth in this game. There's so much, the art style alone, like for example, I don't build all of my content in Attika from scratch. Some of it I will do from scratch, like just a small percentage. A lot of it I will use like custom builders. So, I'll use a character builder so I can customize a lot of things. But again, I'm not building a character from scratch. But when you have an art style like Borderlands, that's all from scratch. Every single piece of this game is done from scratch, which is just quite amazing when you think about it. And the amount of time that would go into making a game like this from a developer, there are certain AAA games where you just go, I can't do anything like this. And this is one of those games where it's just, there's so much content in this. It would be overwhelming even if I were to get 10 of me. I don't think I could do this. And I'm a pretty fast programmer. So that's going to wrap this video up. That is my reacting to these video games here. So let me know what you think about all the games in the comments down below. What do you guys think of Borderlands? Because I know that a lot of, I guess, reviewers, a lot of the pro reviewers out there give it pretty decent reviews. You got like an 8 or something, or a 9. I don't know. I didn't look them up. I heard that it got pretty decent reviews, but then the people that actually played the game gave it bad reviews because of, I think it was the dialogue and the glitches are what made the score go down for for the consumer score, the audience score. So what do you guys think of Borderlands? Let me know. Again, this isn't one of my favorite games or anything, so just keep that in perspective. Objectively, I think that it's a good game. So anyways, let me know what you think in the comments down below. For now, it's going to wrap this video up. Make sure to check out my recent developer log, which I made about Attika Origins. And I went through it was my first developer log. It was like 18 minutes. I kind of give you what it's like to take it, what it's like to actually build a game. That's what I take you through. And I've been putting a lot of work into it. I'm building the demo, and I think the game is starting to come together a little bit. So I still have quite a bit of work to do, but it's starting to look okay. So anyways, check that out. Remember to hit that like and subscribe button down below. And for now, that's going to wrap this video up. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.